like and subscribe. Now, those who have been to a ruined wedding. What happened? When I was 6 or 7 I went to a cousin's wedding. Everything was fabulous for little me. So much sugar everywhere. Basically heaven. The reception was in a big community center that was reserved for the occasion. Went to the girls' bathroom. Passing by the men's room to see my uncle on the floor. Went back to the main room to tell my dad my uncle was looking weird. Well, uncle had a stroke and had died. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying. And everyone except close family left. Bright side is the marriage is still going strong 20 years later, despite what happened that day. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after a terminal diagnosis, and it was touch and go whether he would be well enough to attend the wedding. In the end he was too unwell to attend despite wishing that he could. Just as we got to the wedding reception my friend was informed that his father had just passed away. It was devastating. I've catered many weddings, and there have been some memorable ones. Fights between guests, wedding cakes falling over, red wine spilt on wedding dresses, the lot. The one I'll never forget, an all-day do, small ceremony, a few close friends and family, and a big reception filled with a huge buffet, every type of food you could imagine and a free bar, all in the same venue. They had booked and paid for 250 evening guests, but 30 guests turned up, at most. My heart broke for this couple. A massive beautiful converted barn. Loads of food and drinks. Great music but no guests. At about 10 p.m. the venue was licensed until 11 p.m. The buffet food had barely been touched. The few who were there ate but it hardly made a dent as it was planned for so many more people. I asked the mother of the bride if she wanted me to cover and refrigerate the untouched food so the new couple could take it home, and her response of "Oh no, there are still a lot of people coming" was the most awkward I've ever felt in my life. No more guests showed. There was a flash of car headlights in the distance about 10:30 p.m. and the bride beamed when she thought it was latecomers arriving. But no, it was just taxis arriving to pick up the few who were there. It's the only event I have ever done where we didn't have to kick people out of the venue. At 11 p.m. the place was empty. In a nutshell, bride's parents paid for the day and the happy couple had zero control over their guest list. Her parents invited all their friends to the evening function, but in reality, it was just associates they wanted to flex on, resulting in no one giving a sh about an invite to a wedding where they didn't know the bride or groom. It was basically just a networking event for the bride's parents. I used to do catering work, and this one time my boss sent me to a remote location in the woods on a beautiful river. I found out while we were loading the truck that the boss wouldn't be going and that I was essentially in charge. My boss promised that everything was taken care of, set up, etc. So, you can imagine my surprise when I arrived to this remote location and literally nothing was set up. We were only about an hour early, so I frantically started trying to get the tent in order. We needed extension cords to run the coffee and tea, there were none. We needed tables to set up the food, there were none. I somehow whipped up impromptu everything for the missing things, and just as the bride and groom are arriving, we blow the fuse for our only power source and the place is plunged into darkness. We reset the breaker, I move some stuff around, blow the fuse again. This delicate dance went on for the entire evening. Through speeches, first dance, the works. I think the worst part of the entire experience was when we went to rinse our dishes before boxing them up and found out that when we blew the fuses the water pump for the place stopped working and needed to be primed again. At that point I said forget about it, we'll take them back dirty, and the crew and I spent several more hours after the long ride home doing them. That was the day I worked a 15-hour shift without a break and still ruined the wedding. Needless to say, I quit that job. The mother of the groom was an alcoholic for many years. She decided to quit drinking cold turkey a few days before his wedding. During the reception, she had a seizure and was taken to the hospital via ambulance. I was best man at my sister-in-law's wedding, stepped in for the brother of the groom. That's another story entirely. For a whole year of planning, all the bride, so wanted was a dove release while they said handwritten vows to each other. Very small, non-denominational. Most of the family are atheist anyway. Wedding day arrives, early summer, and something is off with the bird handlers. They show up a bit late and are sourcing help from the wedding party to get everything in line. When the time comes to say their vows, I help the handler carry the chest with the doves in it over to what is to be the altar where the bride and groom are standing. Vows are just about wrapping up and the handler gives Emmy the signal to open the chest. I open it and see 20-30 dead doves in the crate. I immediately close it to try and limit who knows what happened. Too late. The look of horror on her face was all that was needed. We spent the next few hours trying to cheer everyone up, but by the end of the reception the entire wedding party had organized and filed animal cruelty complaints on the handler. It was all anyone could focus on. The wedding was at a state park that's famous for its giant gorge waterfall. I don't know whose idea this was, but someone suggested a photo overlooking this gorge and everybody was game. The wedding party went around a stone security barrier and the maid of honor literally fell off the cliff to her death. It was like 500+ feet. Okay, this ties for worst wedding story in this thread. No one turned up to the reception except myself and partner. There was about 8 people in total and the couple had went all out for the reception. Awkward. Was a guest, a friend of the bride. Did not know anyone attending. Very expensive, over the top place. Several hundred guests of this very Italian wedding. Maid of honor grabs mic at the cocktail hour, begins her speech. Rambling. Drunk. Quickly devolves to stating the recently deceased mother of the bride was against this wedding and that's basically what killed her. Plus Vinny will never give up prostitutes. She is tackled by several people and dragged away. The happy couple is separated and divorced within a year. Plus Vinny will never give up prostitutes. She really went there. Attended a wedding reception and was seated near the cameraman. An aunt of mine was sitting closer to the camera and spent the evening commenting and gossiping about everyone. And much of it came out on the video. The cameraman was great. He did 2 copies, one edited and the other no holds barred. The unedited version is the stuff of legend. Bonus DVD feature. Director's commentary. Release the aunt's Snyder cut. Groom got so drunk the night before he couldn't make it to the altar at the ceremony. They still had the ceremony with only the bride and her party, plus one of the groomsmen, who apparently didn't get wasted. Everyone there was shaking their heads the entire time. The groom did make one singular appearance for a few seconds at the reception. He looked like a zombie and was wearing street clothes. And this was no trashy wedding. The bride was a professional dancer for a major label pop star. So that gives you an idea of the type of people that were in attendance. 200+ people at the ceremony alone, probably double that at the reception. They divorced within 6 months. Father of the bride died suddenly 3 days before the wedding. Pre-COVID. Daddy-daughter dance was mom, bride, and picture of dad. Same with walking down the aisle to give her away. Lots of tears, not many smiles. Even the bartender at the hotel knew the night before and was talking about it with me. My wife and I had to postpone our wedding due to COVID. On the day we would have gotten married, my wife's grandfather passed away. I'm kind of grateful we couldn't get married on that day. There's no way we could have had a good time with such a loss in the family. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk his daughter down the aisle. While we were waiting, the air conditioning broke in the venue. It was over 100 degrees outside and humid AF. The place was overcrowded. You could barely move without bumping into someone else, and in the heat that was extra miserable. I guess the air conditioning problem had also affected the refrigeration or something, because most of the food was spoiled. The only food on the buffet was salad, spaghetti and rolls. Not enough to feed even half the guests. Most people left after the first dance. 2 of the bride's aunts fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were crying. When the wedding planner is also crying, you know the day has spiraled out of control. I feel bad for laughing, but man, that's so true. I'd say that's a rare occasion for a wedding planner. I can kind of relate. I played piano for a wedding once and the bride's father was like 30 minutes late. So I had to just keep making sharp on the fly. Camptown races one more time. It was a big wedding. Over 300 people. Turns out the bride had been having an affair with her cousin's husband. The cousin had known for a little bit, but waited until the wedding to go table to table, letting everyone know the bride was sleeping with her husband. Poor groom was blindsided. Worst part was his father-in-law was well off and opened up a restaurant for him. Well, he lost his wife and his restaurant. I was studying photography and used to act as an assistant to a well-known wedding photographer. Went to a couple's wedding. He shot digital and I shot black and white film. Spent all day with the couple from 9 AM through till 2 AM the next morning. When we left, I could see how genuinely in love they were. It was only a day but I got to know them quite well and really liked them both. The next morning, I get a call from the photographer and his voice was shaky. He explained that the groom had been murdered that night after the reception party. 3 guys had broken into their bungalow to steal wedding gifts. The groom got out of bed to stop them and they executed him in front of the bride. I was in shock for about 2 weeks. This story was in South Africa, if that helps explain how or why this happened. The next weekend, the photographer and I went to the bride's house to present her with the photos. We'd worked together to get the job massively accelerated so she had the photos of her husband. We did it at our own expense and didn't charge her a penny for the day or all the prints and album. Sort of the least we could do, because my photos didn't matter as much. I'd been able to simply capture those natural moments between them, rather than staged wedding photos. So they had the normal album pics but also about 150 snaps of just them being a couple. She was in tears from the moment we arrived till we left a few hours later. She was a shadow of the women I'd met only a week earlier. That still haunts me. This one shook me up more than any other response. Wow, same. I genuinely said what the F out loud. I was expecting the photographer on the phone to say that he lost the photos, not that the effing groom was murdered. Best friend's mom got remarried and had an expensive, beautiful wedding, but for some reason didn't hire a DJ. Last minute her mom asked me to manage the CD and gave me a list along with verbal instructions of when to play each. I tried to warn her that I simply did not follow, but she told me she had confidence in me. Apparently all her life she wanted to walk down the aisle to some specific song, but I just couldn't figure it out. They had to get walking to match the sunset, so she went ahead down the aisle while I flipped through a series of incorrect songs to the horror amusement of the crowd. 4 years after, when I called my friend's house and her stepdad answered, he'd say, "Is this the guy who effed up my wedding?" Ha yeah. I went to a wedding where the bride and groom bought the wedding package on brighten, which is fine. Why spend a fortune for one day? But I guess the venue thought they could cut some corners, so they stuck us in a room that smelled so strongly of cat urine some people immediately left. The only drinks were those from a vending machine. It was next to an airport, so every time a plane took off the ceremony had to be paused because you couldn't hear anything. And the day after the event, every single one of us had food poisoning. Wait, you can buy a whole wedding off of brighten? Only for the cat urine room venue. Which is fine. It wasn't. Not me, but my elder cousin's story. He attended a wedding where the bride and groom got scammed by the wedding organizer. 1 hour before the wedding event, nothing there in the room. No food, no decorations, just few tables, and basically it feels like unused ballroom. The bride and groom realized the wedding organizer scammed them and the wedding organizer took the money to bought themselves a big ol' house. When the bride and groom decide to see the wedding organizer, they caught him sleeping in his house. It became a national TV news here and the wedding organizer got sued by few brides and grooms that got scammed by them, too. Drunk mother of the bride stumbled, fell, and rolled into a lake. Well, that's just hilarious. This was one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids, so they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. Bride landed and dislocated her knee, then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee etc. But she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and threw up down her dress and had to sit with her mum in another room while everyone else danced etc. Felt so bad for her as she spent the rest of the evening crying. I'm imagining everyone awkwardly doing the Cupid shuffle while avoiding eye contact with the sobbing bride. Okay, so no jumping photos in my future wedding now, yikes. Or take off your heels before jumping? Maybe not ruined, but it definitely got tense. Started with the best man groom's brother just absolutely roasting the bride and her parents. Basically called them gold diggers and stuff in front of several hundred family and friends. Then they cut the cake. Apparently, the groom was told under no uncertain terms not to shove cake in her face. Well, he did it anyway and she stormed off, not to be seen for 20 minutes. Reception went on as planned. She got wasted and I'm told she passed out that night in the middle of the street while still in her wedding dress. Pure class. They are divorced now. I worked on a tropical island off the coast of Queensland, Australia. Loads of weddings happened there. Most days there'd be one or two. One day this groom's party comes through my bar. They are on the Bucks party thing before the wedding the next day. They're pretty drunk at 4 PM. I figured they started early and would finish early given they have a sunrise ceremony. Worst idea in the world. For your information, about an hour later they'd left and gone to another bar on the island. Then the bride's party comes through, equally sh-faced. I finished work at 9 PM then came back 3 hours later to work in the nightclub. I get in at midnight, start pouring drinks. It's busy as F with like 250 people in the club. Around 1 AM the groom and bride parties roll in absolutely destroyed. They look disgustingly drunk. I've no idea why security let them in because I wasn't serving them. They left about 45 minutes later. So, roughly, they'd arrive back at their hotel rooms around 2 AM with the expectation that the bride and her party need to be up at 4 AM for hair and makeup to be done in time for a 715 AM ceremony. They all decide we'll just stay up all night and keep drinking until the wedding. At this stage they had to have been drinking for 15-18 hours. Anyway, ceremony time rolls around. She can't walk down the aisle, which is on the beach, in her heels, so she tosses them off. Groom and all their friends are drunk as F and can barely stand. They try to say their vows but the celebrant can't understand them, so she isn't legally allowed to marry them because they are too drunk to consent to marriage. Whole wedding is canned. A simple wedding, like the one they had. For the wedding party and 20 guests cost $35,000. So they wasted all that money to be told sorry, you're drunk, I cannot legally marry you. I was invited to the reception of one of my good friends. They had been courthouse married for months and living happily. When I arrived at the location and saw the big crowd I knew something was wrong. Friend's wife is prone to panic attacks and is extremely agoraphobic to the point of breaking down and crying if she is overwhelmed. Immediately call friend and ask what's going on and if this was okay. Turns out friend's parents invited everyone possible to be there without my friend knowing. After I sent him a picture of the crowd, him and his wife thought it would be better to go on a second honeymoon than have a reception. He sent a message apologizing to all those his wife and him invited and telling them to leave without telling his parents. Parents had a meltdown as we left. I work in weddings, and I have seen parents selfishly cause problems before. But this is the worst. You're awesome looking out for your friend and their wife like that. Aussie bride married into Russian family. There was vodka bottles on every table. The bride tried to keep up with the vodka shots. I was impressed at her effort. Then she disappeared for a couple of hours and didn't move much for the rest of the night. This was around 2009. On the second day of the wedding, the bride went swimming in the ocean. It took place in Tenerife. She swam out too far and was basically lost at sea for 9 hours or so. She eventually found her way back but was in bad shape. Everyone was panicked the whole day and thought she drowned. By the time she got back, she wished she had. Her husband found her phone and read a bunch of messages supposedly from her aunt. But it was quickly clear from the sexy content it wasn't her aunt at all. She had been having an affair with the best man for apparently years. They got an annulment shortly after. $60,000 down the drain. One of the most opulent weddings I've ever been to. We attended a wedding for a family member who didn't have a lot of money. It was hosted at an inexpensive venue but was nice. My heart broke when only a third of the people invited showed up. You could see the hurt in the couple's face. They came up to our table and said, "Do you have any friends in city?" We lived an hour away. They had all this food for 100 people but only 30 guests. They were willing to have complete strangers come down just so their money and food wouldn't go to waste. We hadn't handed over our card with cash inside yet, so my husband hit the ATM and added another $100. This one has seriously bummed me out the most. Agreed. Like going to a family-owned restaurant where it's clearly not doing well and you're the only one there, but many times worse. My spouse and I had something similar happen. Estimated 45 to 50 people total invited. Only 25ish showed. A portion of family, my friends and 2 people from his side. Thankfully, I cooked and decorated on my own and such. It wasn't a huge financial loss. We already knew how his family was, and how parts of my family were. I prepped food and space for them, just in case. I wasn't surprised or upset when people didn't show. With so much food left over, it went home with my siblings. I come from a large and poor family. so all of them appreciated having extras for the week. Somewhere there exists a picture of me in stage blacks in the middle of a drunken wedding reception conga line. My BF at the time was doing sound for the band, as they'd intended to have all live music. Something like 60-100 people showed up. There was a snowstorm involved, and the bride, without missing a beat, invited all of the venue staff, including people who weren't even working the wedding, to come eat and dance. Bride's mother ended up playing DJ for an hour, with the exact same no-nonsense attitude as her daughter, so the band could properly sit down for dinner, and the groom and his groomsmen, still in tucked shirts pants, insisted on helping load out even though it was basically just a drum kit and couple speakers. I have no idea who these people were, but would bet money I can't afford to lose that they're still happily married. Your husband is so kind. I remember being hurt by a couple people that chose not to show to mine. I couldn't imagine a third, especially on a tight budget. Hurricane Ivan. Our wedding was scheduled for Friday and the hurricane hit us dead center on Thursday. We were sitting around with no power on Friday and remembered that a neighbor was a pastor, so my partner and I just knocked on his front door and asked if he would just marry us in the front yard. So the big church wedding was cancelled, but instead I got married in the front yard with chainsaws and stuff in the background. Been married 17 years now. A fight broke out between father of the bride, brother of the bride, and some guy that just happened to be staying at the hotel. In reality, I don't know how much of a fight it was, more just the dad and brother assaulting some man. So anyway, they were both arrested. Cut to the bride sobbing at breakfast because her dad and brother spent the evening of her wedding in jail and now face assault charges for what they did to this poor man. Do you know what the fight was about? No clue. Nothing of substance, I imagine, since they didn't know this person. It was 4 years back now, but I think it was something along the lines of "Did you just effing bump into me?" types that escalated. The groom's father groped both the bride and his daughter, my then girlfriend, multiple times each, ended up getting punched out by his son, and locked in a minivan for a few hours until he sobered up. It was an uncle that pulled this at one wedding I attended. He got grabby with the bride's mother and the maid of honor, at which point he was told to go sit at his effing table and stay there or there would be trouble. He didn't listen and tried grabbing the bride's at which point he was punched and frog marched out into the parking lot by the groom and locked in the back of his own pickup truck with a bloody nose. A friend of my girlfriend was getting married. The wedding was quite normal. They got married in the local church and then there was the party in a nice restaurant. The photographer asked the bride and her bridesmaids, my girlfriend was one of them, to go outside for some photos. Some minutes later, one of the bridesmaids come back asking for help. There were some swans that attacked the photographer, and the majority of the people around him were not doing anything much more than laughing at this guy who was running around and screaming. Went to a co-worker's wedding about 15 years ago, and this technically happened at the reception. It was a beautiful outdoor venue overlooking a lake. Anyways, the groom had planned to sing a song to his new wife and have fireworks launch as he was singing the last note. Well, that last note came, but the fireworks did not. He held that last note for a good 10 seconds before he finally yelled "Moth affairs," threw the mic down and ran to go fight the fireworks guy. No fists were thrown, but somebody did end up in the lake. The party kinda broke up after that. They also ended up getting a divorce about a year later after the groom got fired from his job for showing his dick to his boss's underage daughter. This didn't ruin the whole wedding, but it surely didn't brighten my day. After the ceremony, we were standing in front of the altar and people took turns to congratulate us. As it was my mother's turn, she took my hand and told me she's sorry she raised such a bad person like me. Thank God my husband doesn't speak her language well. My own. It rained and was cold. No one bothered to turn the lights on, so the few pictures I have are dark and grainy. My parents divorced earlier that year, so my dad hated seeing mom for the first time and didn't stick around to get a picture with me. My husband's mom didn't even take off work to attend. Apparently the money was more important. Good news is that we just celebrated our 49th wedding anniversary.